Zarina, it's a huge pleasure to speak with you. Here we are in the heart of Lviv, but you've just come back from Georgia. Before we get into that, tell us and to the audience a little bit about yourself, a little about your background, because I was going to describe you as a journalist, but that's not how you would describe yourself necessarily.
No, not at all. I am a journalist. No. Thank you for asking. Yes, I am a war journalist. I'm a war correspondent for Byline Times in London, also Euromaidan Press, which is an English language newspaper here in Ukraine. I write for other newspapers such as Sunday Post, my home state California newspaper, Fresno Community Alliance, and a number of other publications. I do radio shows sometimes, videos, whatever it takes basically to get the word out, to get the reports out on the Russian war crimes in Ukraine and sometimes in other countries in another part of the world, because as we know, there's no lack of Russian war crimes around to report. So yes, I'm a journalist, but however, I used to be and hope to be, after the war is over and Russia is defeated, a fiction writer. I have a novel and 5 books, short story collections, and even 1 book of poetry. I'm not doing it right now because I think it's more important to focus on this particular work on journalism.
And let's get into Georgia, because we'll come for a minute in the sort of origins and the impulses for you to do what you do, because I think the practice of journalism versus activism is kind of an interesting dynamic. But let's come to that one in a minute. You're down in Tbilisi, and I did one of my episodes where I called it a sort of a new Maidan, but I think there are nuances there that mean it's not an exact comparison. So what drew you to that? What drew you to that story, and what impressions do you have of that compared to the Ukrainian experience of revolution and fighting Russian puppet governments?
Right. Well, for the last 10 years, I've been reporting the hybrid war, which we know is the bigger context of the war. Here in Ukraine, we've been dealing for the last, 13 years by now, since 2014, right? War, conventional war, hot war as it's being called, and the last almost 3 years full-scale invasion, which is also hot war. But before that, we've been dealing all along with the hybrid warfare, different aspects of it, including disinformation warfare, and such known operations as assassinations, say, or the whitewashing of reputations, or laundering the money, and so forth. All of these are the aspects of hybrid warfare, and we can talk about it at length. So what's happening now in Georgia is another part of the front line of hybrid warfare. Here in Ukraine, we just have a different front, and we have this front in London, Jonathan. We have back home, because I'm an American and I'm from California, and right now, as you might have heard, we are having the hybrid warfare full-blown going on back home in America. So since I've been covering it in depth and in detail for the last 10 years, actually 11 by now, it was only logical for me to go to Georgia and interview people there, go a little bit in detail, in depth on what are the patterns that the Kremlin is using there, what are the narratives of the disinformation campaigns, specifics, what do they have in common with Ukraine. What's happening now in Georgia, I don't believe can be called Maidan. It is not reminiscent of what was happening in Ukraine at the time. However, we can say that these events are inspiring the part of the protesters. So for those of you who are not aware, very briefly in a nutshell, the pro-Russian government led or owned rather by a pro-Russian oligarch, Ivanishvili, has won in what the majority of Georgians consider fraudulent election. And since then, they openly took the course against European integration and made an announcement in the end of November that Georgia will not participate in any negotiations about joining the European Union until 2028. And that sparked a huge mass protest, which has been happening at this point for, I believe, 58 days, very close to 60, to 2 months. Every day people are out in the streets, there are different kind of marchers, they're very creative about it. That's the specifics of Georgian protests. There are all kind of marches, anything from fishermen and hunters to the fans of Harry Potter, to theater students, to fathers and sons march, you name it. I mean, there were like pharmacists marching separately, the teams of a small cafe right next to my hotel were marching. My hotel team was marching at the time, you know, the hotel was closed. So, you know, you can find your own protest and join it. And today I hear there were the machines where you swipe your ticket. They were broadcasting the anti-government speeches and stuff. So it's very, very creative and it's very peaceful. The protest started by a wave of violence, but not from the protesters, but rather from the government and special forces. The police was there. There were really the brutal suppression. A lot of people were arrested. I hear up to 500 were arrested, and 50 are now currently detained as political prisoners. So two main demands of the protesters is the new election with the international observers and release of all political prisoners. Meanwhile, the government saw that with the violence there was a lot of world attention, and the press came, and they swiftly changed their tactics and stopped suppressing the protests. So at some point, by the end of December, it became a stalemate, and protesters are in the streets every day, closing the main street, Shotarosta Valley, marching all over the city, with the police just standing by, not interfering. And it continues with some episodes here and there of suppressions. I was a witness of quite a remarkable scene. It was something in between the discreet charm of bourgeoisie Buñuel and Marie Antoinette scene, where the protesters, many students, but not just students, there were all kind of people there in the crowd, surrounded a fancy restaurant and a music hall, which was all glass windows, where about 24 of judges and their spouses and significant others decided to celebrate it was an old New Year, the remainder of the post-Soviet holiday season, you know, the very last of the New Year's Christmas holidays. And they were about to have this marvelous, lavish Georgian feast of cheese pies and wine and, you know, whatnot. There are many courses, and they were like all designer clad and glittery dresses. We could see it because it was all glass, so it was quite cinematic. And at this point, the crowd surrounds the building. Then the police surround the protesters, and there's this standby for many hours. The judges cannot leave the building. The police cannot do anything about the protesters. And eventually the special forces came and pushed the crowd out of the way. I have a video of that I shared on my Twitter. And then they sneaked the judges out of there. So it's another creative way of protesting and bringing all kind of imagination to make it last, because it's hard to protest day after day after day. People are getting tired. It's cold, very cold in the street of Tbilisi. Some are getting sick. Students are now having their exams, so it also slows down the protest. But every day they're there. Every day they are demanding to release their friends. Some are on hunger strikes. And some people say that only Maidan type action will help to fight Ivanishvili and his party Georgian Dream, which was nicknamed Russian nightmare, but it's not there yet.
And while the protests are going on, and I was about to say, and the world's press attention is on them, which of course it isn't, because it's barely covered now. And even at the height of the protests, there's not a huge amount of coverage or deep analysis of what's going on. But while these protests are the visible part of activity, behind the scenes, is it not the case that Georgian Dream are busy dismantling what vestiges of judicial independence, media independence, they're taking the state apart on the orders of Moscow, one would presume, to turn it into an illiberal, not even hybrid regime, but a sort of permanent autocracy?
Well, you can say that, but I think that there is a bigger context that we're having here. They are not doing it autonomously. This Georgian Dream or Russian nightmare is a continuation of, again, like I said, Russian foreign policy, Russian imperial ambitions, Russian hybrid warfare. They are doing this basically on behalf of the Kremlin. Ivanishvili is as widely known of Russian money. He's been having business activities, his money are tied up to the Russian money, and they are highly dependent on whatever the Kremlin wants them to do. And the major reason, the main reason that we have the bird view picture is not just the some parties that is taken over and wants to establish a totalitarian regime. They want to go back to the so-called Russian world. They want to, as many would say, restore the Soviet Union and its latest rendition, the modern capitalist version of it. And that's the bigger picture, and that's what it matters, because whenever you speak to someone there, whenever you interview protesters in the streets, from students to professors, from opera singers to the cashiers, they all say, we don't want to go back to Russia. There are signs everywhere, there are graffitis on the wall, Russia go home, Voronezh, fuck you, we don't want you here. Everybody understands that it's not just about some politicians who are appropriating the power. It's about the state capture by the Kremlin. And
we've had a number of exemplary correspondents over the years who have sort of seen some of this coming, or at least seen that Putin is not a guy you can do business with. Edward Lucas, Luke Harding, we were talking about some of these earlier. Peter Borovtsev is perhaps one of the first to see the propagandistic methodology taking place. But you were spotting this incredibly early on, the re-emergence of sort of Soviet disinformation, but combining it with modern techniques, innovating and turning it into a full hybrid warfare doctrine. How did you first sort of spot that, and how did you trace the evolution of that over the years?
Thank you for this question, and it was both a shock and then a long, tedious journey. I remember very well the moment I recognized it and I wrote about it. I've shared that previously in my interviews, including Byline TV and many others. I spotted a poster in the street of San Francisco, in the heart of San Francisco. There's a poster of Putin holding a koala. It was a very bizarre and shocking and upsetting image to me, because I realized that this is the old, good, tried Soviet tactic, one of many of them in the playbook, of which I wrote after that many times. And that particular one makes you like Putin, because most people like koalas or some warm, fluffy animals.
Hitler liked German shepherds, but yeah, we've been here before.
Yes, yeah, so I started by combining these posters, like Stalin holding a little girl, Hitler holding a puppy, Lenin holding a kitten, you name it, and here he is, Putin with koala, and saying like, look, there's serotonin being, and oxytocin being released.
That's right. Is there a real picture somewhere of Lenin with a kitten? Is that real?
Yeah,
okay, I've seen that one.
They knew very well what they were doing. Propaganda is very old. It's not new. Russians didn't invent it. I mean, basically it's psychology, and it's been there all along. So these guys started to use it, and of course it wasn't just the picture of Putin with koala, it was the messages, because around this poster were other posters saying down with Obama, some racist stuff, and basically messages which were very easily recognizable to me as a product of post-Soviet space, as the message from the Kremlin, message targeting our very innocent, very clueless population back in California and in the United States. And so very briefly, I started to ring a bell and tell people, look, there's an attack on us in information space. And everybody basically said, you are crazy at this point, and I can't even blame them, because it was a crazy proposition. It was very hard to believe into it myself. And then after that, for 10 years, I've been studying how it's done. You know, obviously here in Ukraine, they invested a lot of money on putting together these false narratives, creating story after story, like crucified little boys in Donbass, you know, proverbial. There were cases of group rape in Germany to turn the public mind against the immigrants. I mean, ever since then, I was trying to bring it all together, and again, not as a series of unfortunate events and some accident with the Putin and koala here in San Francisco or something else there, but to show that this is a gigantic industry with a huge investment of oil and gas money that the Russian mafia state appropriated from, from Russian people or the state to which it belonged, and putting this money into the war industry, and not just the conventional war industry, but into this whole, not propaganda, as Peter Pomerantsev wrote and would say. It's an old, outdated word. When we say propaganda, we imagine, World War I posters, and that's not what it is. We are talking about hybrid warfare, and one part of it, it's debatable. We can have the whole separate conversation. What's the best word for it? At some point, I was using a mind war, and it is a mind war, but there's much more to it, and it's a multi-dimensional operation with so many units of the state services engaged. Say, terrorist act that would happen somewhere in Europe is connected to the trolls that would push it on social media, and to the Russian state media like Russia Today and Sputnik, which will pick up the trending hashtag in the past, and then from there it will somehow be leaked into the mass media in the West, such as Washington Post or New York Times, and from there it will land back into Twitter and Reddit or whatnot. So it's a huge operation, coordinated, still not recognized for which it should be, still very dangerous, and still needs to be addressed.
Where we have these conversations about what to call it, I think Russia's war on reality is the one that sticks in my mind. But it's a war for our memory, it's a war for our perceptions, it's a war to warp the very idea of reality itself. And if you don't have an eyewitness account, it can eradicate periods of history, it can eradicate parts of the map, geography, people's identities. I think even people who work in with us, many of them don't realize just how incredibly powerful and pernicious it is in the age of certainly AI and social media and exponential content. Well, we're here. I'm very grateful that you're out here in the cold talking, but it is cold, so we're gonna wrap this one up today. But I think we've launched a couple of threads which we can pick up in future conversations, and we'd be absolutely delighted to have those, especially with your extraordinary, not just experience, but the sort of passion you bring to this subject.
Well, I would be very happy to talk to you, Jonathan and Yaroslava, in the future, and not just about my recent reports in Georgia, but about my 3 years of reporting in Ukraine that includes many war crimes and the role that disinformation is playing in the war crime in genocide, being a part of it. So I'm looking forward to the next conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to bring to you the reality of Tbilisi protests. Right now we are in front of the parliament building right behind me. The Christmas tree is still here because the Christmas traditionally celebrated later in this country, which is Orthodox Christian. Plus there is one other holiday that they have left over from the Soviet times, which is on the 13th of January, and we just celebrated it here with fireworks, and it's the Old New Year, which is also connected with all kinds of superstitions, the way you meet it, the way you spend it. And we were here at midnight with the fireworks, and some people were drinking, well, not champagne, but hot tea. As you could tell, it's a very peaceful protest. Here you have children, dogs, sometimes there are ponies, there are cotton candies, balloons, lots of flags, people are singing, there's a mulled wine, if you can imagine that. And during our talk, Jonathan Fink and I will bring you the reality of the post-Soviet space, the common challenges that Ukraine and Georgia are experiencing, the common fight, common expectations and aspirations. Georgia, just as Ukraine, Moldova, and many other countries neighboring the Russian Federation are, as you probably well aware of, are the parts of so-called post-Soviet space. But Georgian people are very decided and very determined not to be defined by just 70 years of the Soviet rule, which is a very small portion of their very long history. And we can talk about the history in the context of the current situation a little bit. We will also speak about disinformation and the way the public information space is being carved by the Kremlin propagandists. This is very important to understand and to know the difference between the reality and between the perceived reality, between the reality that being pushed upon us by the professional paid Kremlin propagandists. People who gather here have avoided being brainwashed, unlike the people in the Russian Federation who, after 20 years of their state propaganda pummeling them with the specially engineered narratives, bought into the idea of the so-called Russian world and into the Russian empire ambitions. We are in Shotaru-Staveli Street, where every night for 50 days, 50 nights, the Georgian people have been gathering to protest, first of all, what they believe is a fraud election, demanding for new election being held justly with the international observer. And their second demand is the liberation of the political prisoners, of which there are currently 50, and over 500 people detained over the course of almost 2 months of protests. The protests culminated in a strike yesterday, which was the first strike in the history of independent Georgia, and over 400 businesses were closed only for 3 hours. It is a warning strike, but it was quite a remarkable event, I'm being told, because Georgia has no trade unions, yet the strike did happen. I have seen a variety of marches, from the marches of pharmaceutical companies to local cafes to theater students. I saw ballet and opera actors on strike, museum staff on strike, McDonald's staff, all standing next to each other and demanding just election and democracy. We are going to speak about that from Ukraine with Jonathan Fink. Welcome to the show.
We fight here against one-party rule and authoritarian regime. Our fight is linked with the brave Ukrainians who fight for their freedom against Russian tyranny. We also fight here against Russian imperialism and Russian hybrid warfare. We are standing here every day. We fight for our European future. Once I was shot by rubber bullet from the special forces, but fortunately I dodged it. Police have been using tear gas and water jets almost daily. Very peaceful protesters were tortured. Police used unlawful force against them. Women were beaten and tortured. Russia is trying to increase its influence worldwide, especially near its borders. And Georgia is Russia's southern border. Putin wants to rebuild Soviet Empire. He wants to Russify Georgia, but we won't let him. Like, we will fight till the win. We want to let criminal terrorist Putin to take over our country. Georgians' fight and struggle is not only their struggle. This is fight against Russian tyranny, which not only affects Georgia but affects European Union. If we won't stop Putin now, tomorrow it will be France, Germany, and other European countries. Authoritarianism is spreading from Russia around the globe. So it's a huge threat not only for Georgia, but for all Europe and the United States. It's also very important for our region, South Caucasus. It's a strategic place for EU because of Black Sea, and it's Russia's southern border, and Armenia's future is dependent on Georgia's future too, because Armenia don't have any border with democratic nations. We need your attention, we need your solidarity. We need sanctions on this pro-Russian regime.
This is my grandmother's parents. This is David Adame. He was killed in 1938 by Russians. This is my grandmother's mother, and she was in prison about 5 years. This is what Russia do with us right now. We are here to protect this.
Today, the families and the descendants of the people whose ancestors were purged during the Soviet regime, especially in the 1930s, during the Great Terror. So I'm one of them. My grandmother's uncle was executed in 1938. Many thousands of others were executed or exiled. We're just commemorating that, but also we're joining the wider protest movement here in Georgia.
This man was teacher. He was my mother's father. He lives here, and it was Russians' repression.
He was parliamentarian of First Republic of Georgia, and he was shot by occupants in 1924.
This man was his grandfather, who was taken in 1937 by these Bolsheviks and by repression.
He was my grandfather, and he was killed in 1937. He was an engineer.
The great grandfather of David, who was killed in 1924. He was the judge, and he was killed because he didn't take the decision in favor of the regime. The situation well compares to like 100 years ago of what happened back then. It kind of resonates with the protests and with the repression against the communities, against the Georgian people. So basically what we are witnessing now is kind of a copy-paste, the replica of the past.
The portraits these people are carrying are of their ancestors who were killed by Russia in 1924 and 1937.
Georgian. Pretty much everyone in this crowd has lost an ancestor.
There's a big group who protests in front of the national broadcaster, the Channel 1, every day. Unspeakable things take place on Channel 1. We can say that it's entirely hijacked by propaganda and hijacked by the government, which is only one party at this moment. We do not believe in the media that is controlled by one party. It was true that sanctions have quoted Vasil Maglaperidze, the head of the Channel First, as an ideologist of Georgian Dream. So a lot of covering up the truth, falsifying the reality in many different forms, like sometimes there was Rustaveli was absolutely full, but only entertainment shows are shown on Channel 1. Journalists are taking side of the government whenever they speak to the activists. They want to expose the protest as a violent protest, that there is an organized violence group. What we demand is, first of all, the resignation of the head, managing director, and also there is one person which is a known sexist and predator. We do not believe in such standards. These people do not deserve to speak to people. Channel 1 is financed by our taxes. It's just unfair that a country that Georgian Dream threw into poverty should now be financing unspeakable lies through the central media. In the days where police expressed unspeakable brutality and a lot of tortures are taking place, a lot of incarcerations are taking place, incarceration of 14, 15-year-old children without no grounds. Channel 1 was broadcasting films. First days we protested really hard and went into the building and they gave us 14 minutes. It was an incredible example of democracy where people right there decided who would speak for the people. Of course, it was heavily manipulated. These 40 minutes were very crucial for Georgian Dream because it uncovered many lies. It uncovered many truths. They're now very, very scared because they're not giving this particular news block to people. Just a little time and I think we'll definitely win.
Unfortunately, many Americans think that Georgia is the only state in their country, but it's not true. We have a very, very big history. Russia is occupant 1991 when Georgia got off the Soviet Union and Soviet Union was demolished. They wanted to take our independence and maintain their control of the country. So in 1992 to 1994 they attacked us in Abkhazia and in Skhinvar, and they occupied both of these territories. We couldn't take it back, of course, and in 2008 when Georgia said that their only way and path was NATO and the European Union, we tried to get in there, and because of that in 2008 they attacked us in Samachablo, and they actually were bombing and killing innocent people in there, and they were provocating us, so our government had to act and they fired back, and that meant a very big war. They came from two different places, from Samachablo and Abkhazia, and their only wish was to take all over the Georgia. They were going to Tbilisi, and that's when European Union helped us when the presidents of many countries, for example Poland, Ukraine, Estonia, Lithuania, they came in here and they were standing with us in here in Rustaveli, and they said that they would stop their tanks and their planes and their people from taking Georgia, and they risked their lives by standing with us here, and we appreciate it so much, and that's what we need now. It's not war here, but we are going to Russia peacefully, and we will tell this government that our only way is European Union, is Europe, and these people, you guys are supporting us very much, and USA, NATO and Europe is standing with us. It is injustice to be like this. So it's within the European Union's flag, Georgian and Ukraine flag, because we respect them and we support them in every way we can. So it means the social priority is injustice, and we cannot live in dictatorship, in oligarchy. Prime Minister, President, Ministers, and they are getting too much for what they are doing. They took our country and they are now taking money from our budget. These are kids who have no parents, and they are financially unstable and they cannot leave. Their support is monthly 200 lari. Can you just compare how much difference is that? So these are kids without parents, these are disabled person, and these are people, old people. After 70 years they are giving them 350 lari, and before 70, 450. So these are people who fought in the war, and they are only giving them 100 lari. It's injustice because they are giving 45 lari a month to the people who were pushed out of their homes and they had nothing when they came. So the war was going on in 1992 to 1994 and 2008 when Russia occupied our territories, and these are people who were kicked out of their homes, their houses were burned, and their houses are now abandoned in Sukhumi and other territories. In Georgia, every sixth child is starving. The truth is in the eyes of poor children. This means freedom to the prisoners of regime.
A Russian oligarch succeeded in capturing Georgian state, which developed from being a failing state in the 90s into a steadfast, very important ally of the West, and which still carries quite a significant geopolitical value for the European and Euro-Atlantic interests. And I think it is in this interest that Euro-Atlantic community should act and help Georgian people who are fighting for their democratic future, for their independence, to stay allied with the West, to stay independent, and to perform their natural international function of connecting wider Black Sea region with the wider Caspian region, these two strategically important parts of Eurasia. And this is a combination of values-based foreign policy where you support a democratic aspirations of the Georgian nation with the national interest, realpolitik interest of having access to strategically important region to which Georgia is both a bridge and a key.
Georgia is next to Russia, and Georgia is as a crossroad from east to west. Very important geopolitically for the Western countries to have access to the Black Sea and through China and to Iran and to other countries, to Asia generally. Last 12 years we had the oligarch Ivanishvili in Georgia, who was a Russian project. He came to the power in 2012, and from 2012 he started the stage capturing. Maybe you can divide in three parts. He owns the media, propagandistic media, same like in Russia, Prigozhin fabrics, and he owns the troll farms, what Prigozhin established in 2014 in Russia. He owns the judicial system, he has own judges, actually who they are sanctioned by US as a Russian guys who are linked with Russia, and the church who are supporting the Ivanishvili's regime. So Russia made everything in Georgia in the manner of hybrid warfare to penetrate in every single system, to have influence all of this sphere of Georgia, and manipulate the public opinion. Now we are in final fight with Russia, our fight to become a European country, to become EU member country. But Ivanishvili is trying to stop this movement towards EU and NATO, what aspiration what Georgians had since 90s, since Georgian became independent. Without the support of our Western countries, without the sanctions, there will be less chance to win. And if Georgia fails, it fails whole region, and we will get the world divided in dictatorship and the democratic countries who can't work with each other to have free and liberty all of the world.
What is happening right now here is on the 28th of November, the illegitimate Georgian parliament announced that they are stopping all negotiations with the European Union for Georgia to get into the European Union. And this sparked a huge protest in the country, in the people, and it's happening for 42 or 41 days. It's a very cold winter, and the people of Georgia are coming out to the streets and inventing new ways to protest and to sustain this kind of resistance. So this is Theatre and Film University, and the student movement has occupied the university. They're not leaving the building, and they're demanding from the administration to support the political prisoners, to make a statement supporting the victims of the regime, and political statements, and the derailing of the European path, which is Georgian constitution. So this is what's happening. These are the names of the political prisoners, prisoners of the regime, and the demand of new elections, new fair and right elections, which Georgian people were rigged of.
I'm here to protest, and I'm here to stand with my friends who are in the prison right now, and people who are like, I don't know how to say this in English, but like, we're protesting for freedom and for everything, good new elections and everything, and policy is like catching everyone, and this is so unfair, and that's why here I am right now with my friends and with my family. Because I want new elections, I want freedom, I want good country, I want a country that I want to live in, and I want to tell everyone that everyone should come here every day to stand with our friends and family and everyone, you know.
So I just want to add that what is happening in Tbilisi right now, this is an example of how civic community is fighting for democracy, fighting for freedom, for basic human rights, and for justice, basically. So Tbilisi and Georgia is a capital of democracy today.
We are standing at the Rusali Theatre, where students of that university are protesting. They're demanding to be free their friend who was jailed by our police, which I don't know if we can barely call police, because they are forces which are against Georgian people, and they are not trying to find any justice. Today 10 people were jailed in Batumi and 1 in Tbilisi. I don't know if people can find their voices again, because we started these protests to find our voice, which was stolen on elections, and then we found out that our government doesn't want Europe anymore, and we are stopping any negotiations until 2028. These protests became massive, and that's why all the Georgians are fighting with their blood, basically. We can see here people who were injured during these protests. One of my friends, journalist Simon Rogghe, was injured that day as well. None of these cases were investigated, so we are risking with our lives, with our health, and we are risking with our future, because our pro-Russian government is doing nothing for people, and we are still demanding our political prisoners to be free, and we are still demanding fair elections, which Georgian people really deserve.